Karen had always considered herself a patient woman. Between managing two rambunctious kids, a demanding job, and a golden retriever with a shoe fetish, patience was practically a survival skill. But there was one thing that tested her limits: the basement. For 15 years, John had kept it locked, dismissing her questions with a smile and a wave. Just tools and junk, he'd say, as if that were an acceptable answer. Karen wanted to believe him, but there was something about the way he avoided the subject that nagged at her. One Thursday afternoon, the house was unusually quiet. The kids were at soccer practice and John was out of town for one of his conferences. Karen stood in their bedroom, folding laundry, when she noticed something odd in his sock drawer. A key. Karen stared at it for a moment, her heart picking up speed. It was small and slightly tarnished, as if it hadn't been used in years. Her eyes darted toward the locked basement door at the end of the hallway. "No," she muttered, shaking her head. "It's none of my business." But the key burned in her palm like a dare. 5 minutes later, she was standing in front of the basement door, key trembling in her hand. "Okay, Karen," she whispered to herself. "It's probably just old tools, paint cans, maybe some spiders. Nothing to freak out about." The lock clicked open. The creaky stairs groaned under her weight as she descended, flashlight in hand. The basement smelled damp, the kind of musty odor that clung to forgotten places. Karen swept the beam of light across the room. Shelves lined with paint cans, a dusty workbench, and cardboard boxes labeled Xmas and Karen's college stuff greeted her. "It's just a mess," she said aloud, almost relieved. But as she turned to leave, the flashlight caught something in the far corner. A wooden chest, partially hidden beneath a tarp. Karen's stomach tightened. The chest didn't belong to the usual chaos of their basement. It was too deliberate, too secret. She approached it slowly, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The chest was old, its brass latch tarnished with age. Karen hesitated, her mind racing with possibilities. What if it's nothing? Or worse, what if it's something? She slid the key into the latch and turned it. The lid creaked open. Inside, stacks of photographs lay neatly arranged, some yellowed with age. Karen picked one up. It was a portrait of a young woman smiling at the camera. She shuffled through more. They were all women, all smiling, all different. Beneath the photos were small trinkets, lockets, bracelets, even a hand letter tied with a ribbon. Her breath caught. What is this? Her mind jumped to every true crime podcast she'd ever listened to. Is John a serial killer? Have I been sleeping next to a monster? The sound of her phone buzzing startled her. She pulled it from her pocket and saw John's name flashing on the screen. "Hello?" Her voice was sharp, accusatory. "Hey, sweetheart," John said casually, as if everything were normal. "I just realized I left the basement key in my sock drawer. You didn't happen to—" "What the hell is this, John?" Karen interrupted, her voice trembling with anger. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Karen, listen to me. Whatever you found, it's not what you think." Her fingers tightened around the phone. "Not what I think? Are you kidding me? There are pictures of women in a chest in our basement, jewelry, letters. John, what is this?" "I can explain," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "I promise, just don't touch anything else, okay? I'll be home tonight." The line went dead. Karen stared at the chest, her mind spinning. She didn't know whether to scream, cry, or run. All she knew was that the man she thought she knew had been keeping a secret, and it was sitting right there in front of her, waiting to be unraveled. Karen sat on the couch, her hands gripping the edge of the wooden chest as if it might spring to life and attack her. The photographs inside stared back at her, each smile mocking her confusion and fear. She tried to think rationally, but her thoughts kept circling back to the same terrifying conclusion. Who are these women, and what do they have to do with John? By the time she heard his car pull into the driveway that evening, Karen's emotions had swung between fury and heartbreak so many times she felt dizzy. The sound of his footsteps on the porch made her grip the chest even tighter. The door opened, and John stepped inside, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a wariness she had never seen before. "Karen," he said gently, closing the door behind him. She looked up at him, her eyes blazing. "Don't you Karen me! Sit down! Start talking!" John hesitated, his gaze flicking to the chest on the coffee table. "You opened it." "Of course I opened it," she snapped. "What did you expect me to do? Pretend I didn't find a chest full of photos of other women?" He exhaled and sat down across from her, rubbing his hands together. It's not what you think. Karen slammed her hand on the chest, making him flinch. Stop saying that. You're my husband, John, the man I've spent 15 years with, the father of my kids. And now, out of nowhere, I find this thing in our basement, and all you can say is it's not what you think? Explain, now. John nodded, his jaw tightening. Okay, but you have to promise to listen before jumping to conclusions. I'm not promising anything, she said coldly. Just talk. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. My real name isn't John Smith. Karen's eyebrows shot up. What? It's Jonathan Meyer. My family was put into witness protection when I was a kid. Her laugh was sharp and bitter. Witness protection? Are you serious right now? Is this some kind of joke? It's not a joke, he said quietly. My father testified against a dangerous crime family. After that, the government relocated us, gave us new names, and split us up to keep us safe. Karen stared at him, her mind racing. You're telling me you've been lying to me about your entire identity for 15 years? I wasn't lying, he said quickly. I was protecting you. If anyone ever found out who I really was, it could put you and the kids in danger, she scoffed. Danger? From who? You think the mob is still looking for you after all this time? I don't know, he admitted, his voice trembling. But I wasn't willing to take that risk. That's why I kept it all hidden. Karen folded her arms. And these women? Who are they? Your sisters? She practically spat the word. Yes, John said, his voice firm. They're my sisters, those photos and trinkets. They're all I have left of them. Karen's anger faltered as she looked back at the chest. She picked up a photograph, studying the smiling girl in it. Why didn't you ever tell me? You've had all this time to say something. John sighed deeply. Because I didn't know how. What was I supposed to say? Hey, by the way, I'm not really John Smith, and my family was scattered across the country because of a mob trial. It's not exactly first date material. This isn't a first date, she said sharply. This is our life, our marriage. Don't you think I had the right to know who I married? Yes, he said softly, his eyes meeting hers. You did, and I'm sorry. I was scared, Karen. I didn't want to lose you. Karen's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice, but she wasn't ready to let him off the hook. So, what now? Are we supposed to just pretend this never happened? No, John said. Now we find them. My sisters. I've been looking for years, but it's hard when you're living under a fake name. Karen's grip on the photograph tightened. She looked at the chest again, at the trinkets and letters that suddenly seemed less sinister and more tragic. What happened to them? She asked softly. They were sent to different foster families, John said. We weren't allowed to stay together. It was supposed to keep us safe, but I've always felt like I lost them, like I failed them. Karen's throat tightened. She set the photograph down and reached across the table, taking his hand. We'll find them, John. We'll figure this out. He looked at her, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. You mean that? She nodded, though her voice was still tinged with exasperation. But if we do, you're going to make this right. No more secrets, no more lies. Do you hear me? I hear you, he said, his voice steady. For a moment, they sat in silence. The weight of 15 years of secrets hanging between them. Finally, Karen leaned back and sighed. By the way, she said, her tone lighter but still sharp, you're sleeping on the couch tonight. John managed a small smile. Fair enough. And tomorrow, she added, pointing at him, you're explaining those cassette tapes I found in the basement. His smile turned sheepish. Those, high school mixtape. For now, it was enough. The morning sun filtered through the curtains as Karen sat at the kitchen table, staring at her laptop. John shuffled in, looking groggy but determined. He poured himself a cup of coffee and joined her, setting his mug down with a quiet clink. So, Karen said without looking up, her fingers poised over the keyboard. Where do we start? John took a sip of his coffee, his eyes scanning the screen. I've tried the obvious. Social media, missing persons registries. But it's been years. They've probably changed their names just like I did. Karen sighed, clicking through a genealogy website she'd opened the night before. And you're sure they're still out there? Alive, I mean? I don't know, John admitted, but I have to believe they are. If I don't... He trailed off, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the words he couldn't say. Karen softened. She knew this wasn't just about finding his sisters. It was about redeeming himself for the years he'd spent in silence. "Well," she said, "lucky for you, I'm a better detective than you are." John smirked. "Is that so?" "Absolutely. Step one, you're going to tell me everything about them. Names, birthdays, any little details you remember. No holding back this time." He nodded, his expression serious. "Okay, Emma was my twin. She had this laugh that could light up a room. She loved animals. She used to sneak stray cats into our house. And Claire, our youngest sister, she was obsessed with space. She wanted to be an astronaut." Karen smiled faintly, jotting down the details. "Anything else?" John rubbed the back of his neck. "Claire had this little scar on her forehead from falling off her bike. Emma used to tease her about it, but only because she felt bad for not catching her in time." Karen's fingers paused over the keyboard. "You really miss them, don't you?" "Every day," John said quietly. The search consumed them for weeks. Karen stayed up late scouring social media profiles, genealogy websites, and even forums for people searching for lost family members. John dug through old memories, piecing together fragments of their childhood in the hopes of finding a lead. One night, Karen stumbled across a profile that made her heart skip a beat. The woman in the photo had the same piercing blue eyes as John, the same high cheekbones. Her name was Emily Jones, and she lived in Ohio. "John," Karen called, her voice urgent. He rushed into the room, his face pale with worry. What is it?" She pointed to the screen. "Look, tell me that isn't your sister." John leaned over her shoulder, his breath hitching. "That's her," he whispered. "That's Emma." Karen grinned, triumphant. "I told you I was better at this than you." He didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the screen as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "I need to call her," he said, his voice trembling. Karen placed a hand on his arm. "Wait, let's do this right. We don't want to scare her off." A week later, they stood outside a small coffee shop in Ohio, nerves crackling between them like static. "You ready?" Karen asked, squeezing his hand. John nodded, though his jaw was tight. "As ready as I'll ever be." The door jingled as they stepped inside. Emma was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked up as they approached, her eyes widening in recognition. "Jonathan," she whispered, her voice cracking. John froze for a moment before breaking into a smile. "Emma." She stood, and before either of them could say another word, they were in each other's arms, tears streaming down their faces. Karen watched from the sidelines, her own eyes misty. It was like seeing two parts of a puzzle finally click into place. After what felt like an eternity, they sat down, and Emma looked at John, her expression a mix of joy and disbelief. "I thought I'd never see you again," she said. "Me too," John admitted. "I've been looking for you for years. I didn't know where to start." Emma laughed through her tears. "I thought about you all the time. I even kept some of your old drawings." John's face lit up. "The ones of the cats? Please tell me you don't still have those." "Oh, I do," Emma said with a grin. "I've got them framed." Karen couldn't help but laugh. "I like her already," she said, earning a grateful smile from Emma. The drive home was quiet, but filled with a sense of peace that Karen hadn't felt in weeks. John stared out the window, his face a mixture of exhaustion and contentment. "Thank you," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Karen glanced at him. "For what?" "For not giving up on me," he said. "For helping me find her." Karen smiled, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "We're not done yet. You've still got Claire to find." John chuckled. "One sister at a time." "And," Karen added, her tone light but firm, "you still owe me an explanation for those cassette tapes." John groaned, his head falling back against the seat. "I told you, they're mixtapes from high school." Karen smirked. "Uh-huh, we'll see." As they drove into the sunset, Karen couldn't help but feel like they were heading towards something brighter. A future where secrets were replaced by trust, and the missing pieces of their lives finally fit together.